Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this Citrix Summit 2019 highlights webinar. My name's Andy McCullough. I'm a Solutions Architect at Ultima in the Modern Workspace team. And what we're going to do today is basically give you the highlights from Ultima's experience at Citrix Summit this year. So first thing we're going to do is, what is Citrix Summit? So Citrix Summit is effectively the sales and technical kickoff for the year for Citrix. So what that involves is a number of partners. I believe this year there are around 5,000 attendees, where we engage with Citrix and we talk about what the message and the strategy and the go-to-market plans are for the year to come. So one of the important things to note about these events is, unfortunately, a lot of the content that gets covered is actually covered under non-disclosure agreements. So unfortunately, there's some things that we just can't talk about at this point. But what we can do is talk about the themes and the strategies going forwards, and we can give you some indicators to things that you're likely to see going towards the more public events in the summertime. So Citrix, the other big event that Citrix hold is Citrix Synergy, which is in May this year in Atlanta, which is where a lot of the new capabilities, lots of new functionalities and products will be more formally announced. Obviously, at which point we can then start to go into more detail. But overall, it was a very successful Citrix Summit, and I think there were a lot of positive messages coming out of it. Obviously, Ultima made a particularly strong start to the year, which is fantastic. So Ultima were actually announced as one of the worldwide partners of the year for the EMEA region, which is a fantastic position to be in, and it reflects our level of engagement with Citrix and our abilities as an organization to deliver compelling and engaging workspace solutions. So having that accolade and recognition from Citrix is obviously something that we're very proud of as an organization. So that was actually announced on day one, which obviously kind of put us all in a very good position for the week. So that was a fantastic start for us. So looking at the messaging from Citrix, I think one of the things that they tried to establish throughout 2018 and as part of their 2020 vision. So Citrix have a strategy going forward of basically where they'd like to be as an organization and the types of solutions they're planning on delivering over the next few years. And all of these, all the efforts internally within Citrix and also within the partner community around three core pillars. So we can see on screen here, we've got choice, experience, and security. And I think we can all agree that these are essential components of any successful workspace solution. So some of the things we've seen Citrix deliver in the last year, so around choice, I think one of the key messages is that they expect customers to be delivering hybrid multi-cloud solutions. So the cloud portability is a key aspect. So one of the big announcements that we saw last year was in terms of support for GCP, Google Compute platform, which effectively gives Citrix support for all of the main cloud vendors. So anyone that you want to consume, you've got the ability to deliver your Citrix solutions on those. For example, kind of furthering that message, there was a recent announcement around NetScaler ADC or Citrix ADC being supported on Google Cloud, which is fantastic. So furthering that message even more. We've seen Server 2019 day one support, which again kind of furthers your choice in terms of operating systems that you're going to be using. Citrix have made certain statements in terms of their support for RDMI. So this is kind of around the Windows Virtual Desktop offering. So again, expect to see a lot of announcements kind of around that, kind of around Synergy time, in terms of the capability Citrix are going to be enabling around that solution set. We've seen a strong year in terms of SD-WAN, so there's a lot of new capabilities that are being delivered in the SD-WAN space from Citrix. For example, they were the recommended partner by Microsoft for the Azure Virtual WAN solution, and there have been some nice new additions in terms of capabilities around enhancing and optimizing Office 365 experiences for users, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on. And there's a constantly evolving world of endpoint management. So through Citrix Endpoint Management, which used to be Zen Mobile, there's a lot of new capabilities that have been developed there in terms of being able to support a varied device set, delivering the breadth and depth of control that enterprises need to be able to control any devices in their enterprise. And around experience in the last year, we've seen a lot of new things coming out. So, for example, we've got the Workspace app, which delivers a more centralized experience for users. So we should be seeing less of multiple touch points, multiple clients that users have to deploy to be able to consume Citrix solutions. We've seen some nice capabilities in terms of integration with other solutions. So, for example, ServiceNow integration with Citrix Workspace. Citrix also released things like Workspace hubs in cooperation with third parties such as Computing. And in the security space, there have been some interesting evolutions in the last year as well. So probably the bigger ones in that have been around the Citrix Analytics capabilities with user behavior analytics and cloud app control, which again is a big one, which is kind of gaining more traction in a lot of enterprises. So as they start to consume more SaaS applications, need to be able to control those and control the data within those becomes more important to a lot of organizations. We've also seen some new additions to the Citrix family. So we can see in the security column, we've got Citrix Intelligent Traffic Management, which is a capability which was acquired through the Citrix acquisition. So Intelligent Traffic Management, for those of you who aren't aware, is effectively a cloud delivered service which enables you to intelligently route users to optimal resources. So this is for those of you who are kind of familiar with the NetScaler or Citrix ADC solution stack. This is sort of global server load balancing on steroids. So rather than just having a small scale view of your own performance, Citrix works on an internet scale, so it handles billions of measurements per day in terms of understanding how different ISPs and content delivery networks and cloud services are actually performing, so it can intelligently route user connections to the optimal location. So what we see in the common enterprise is that there are a lot of point solutions. There tends to be products which are married to a particular task or a particular purpose or a particular challenge. So one of the things that Citrix is striving to do is to be able to reduce the complexity of that type of environment. You can see the different touch points, different products you may have involved in your environment. Citrix is looking to be able to rationalize those to simplify the administration, to simplify the deployments, and to simplify the user experience. So these fall into some major buckets, and these are the kind of key areas that Citrix are working in today. So obviously one of the critical aspects is being able to deliver a compelling cloud experience in a cloud of your choice. Desktop as a service is a new offering that Citrix are working towards. So this is alongside the Windows Virtual Desktop capabilities that Microsoft are releasing. We've got mobile workspace experience, so making sure that users can access their workspace from anywhere on any device at any time. We've got intelligent workspace, which is actually a new concept which Citrix are working on. And again, this is another area where I'd expect to see some more announcements kind of around the synergy timeframe. We've got security analytics, which is part of the Citrix Analytics stack. So Citrix Analytics was announced last year, the first component of that being the security analytics. There are some additional capabilities around that, which again will be kind of discussed further this year. But there are some key enhancements to that, which again we'll go into in a bit more depth later on. And then we've got hybrid multi-cloud networking. So that sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but effectively what it is an architecture which supports your ability to deploy applications in a place of your choosing. So it's acknowledging the fact that not everyone's going to the cloud. Most customers are in a position where they're potentially in a hybrid setup, or some of the more advanced customers may be in a position where they're actually using multi-cloud deployments, so potentially across 2 or more different providers. So hybrid multi-cloud networking is a real hot area for Citrix at the moment. So obviously with their software first ADC capabilities, they have the ability to support those multi-cloud type environments with the same feature set and capabilities, regardless of the underlying provider. So we touched on before the cloud app control and secure SaaS delivery. So again, there's some new capabilities that are being offered around that at the moment. That again is a kind of particularly hot area where we're seeing a lot of customer interest as customers start to adopt more SaaS applications. And simplified administration. So there's a lot of work going on in the background in terms of delivering that simplified administration experience to reduce the number of touch points that users have to go to reduce the number of touch points and products that administrators have to maintain. So Citrix are combining all these capabilities. So we have our kind of core workspace capabilities, we have our analytics, and we have our networking stack. And combined, this is what Citrix utilized to deliver a compelling workspace experience. So that's the strategy. That's where we're going. So we're looking at simplification, we're looking at consolidation, and we're looking at delivering that compelling, engaging experience for users. So what I'm going to do now is just touch on a few of the announcements that we can talk about and how they can kind of benefit you today. So one of the things that was announced just pre-Citrix Summit was some additional integration with Citrix Analytics and Microsoft. So the concept of Citrix Analytics is that it can use indicators in your environment. So whenever a user accesses a Citrix solution, so kind of be that virtual apps and desktops, be that ShareFile, be that Zen Mobile, there's a load of telemetry which gets generated. Now, all this telemetry previously would just kind of go off into the ether. It would be used for some always-on tracing for troubleshooting, but effectively it never really got put to any kind of real use. Now, with Citrix Analytics, what you have the ability to do is to actually feed all that telemetry into Citrix's analytics service. Now, what that can do is then it give you some insights into how users are working in the environment. So, as I say, at the moment, there are 3 kind of pillars in terms of Citrix Analytics. So there's security, there's productivity, and there's performance. So the pillar which is available now, so is something you can go out and consume today, is the security analytics. Now, what this does is this takes the telemetry from your Citrix environment, feeds it through some machine learning modeling, and then what it will do is effectively it can give you a risk score for a user. Now, why is that useful? That basically gives you indicators as to when somebody's doing something which isn't normal, and it allows you to react to that. So what that gives you is effectively a view as to how people are working in their environment, so you can flag unusual behavior which may be troublesome. So for example, if you've got a user who doesn't particularly access a lot of data in their day-to-day job, if all of a sudden they start exporting large numbers of sensitive documents, then you can automatically flag that as being an unusual behavior, and that may be something which you wish to act on. So you may wish to either just reach out and contact the user to understand what they're doing, or you could take some kind of closed loop responses which can be configured automatically. So you may wish to revoke access to certain types of documents or certain sensitive areas, or you may want to kind of just log them off, or you may want to kind of block their account. So there are a lot of different responses that you can configure, but effectively the key element is that you need to understand that something's changed before you can actually respond to it. So that's a key area of visibility that a lot of organizations lack at the moment, is the ability to understand a user's risk level once they're actually inside your perimeter. So there's a lot of security products which will secure your perimeter and secure the initial authentication, so validating the user's identity, but there's not a lot of solutions which enterprises commonly deploy which will understand what users are doing once they're already in your environment. So Citrix Analytics gives you some key capabilities around that, especially within a Citrix environment, to be able to control and respond to any unusual behavior that might occur. Now, what's actually been announced recently is kind of one of the gaps that kind of we identified kind of early on with this is that there are other analytics engines. So kind of one of the more common ones that enterprises will be feeding data into will be the Microsoft Security Graph. So if you're consuming Azure based solutions, so for example, you may be using Azure AD, you may be using kind of Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, you may be using Office 365, you may be using Azure Information Protection. These are all separate products which kind of previously would feed into the Microsoft Security Graph, and you'd be able to get some insights from Microsoft as to a user's particular risk level. You may kind of want to step up their authentication requirements. So one of the nice capabilities around identity protection is the ability to reduce the barriers for the user. So kind of only challenge for single factor authentication unless you see that there's something unusual about what they're doing, or where they're authenticating from, or they might be connecting from a new device, at which point you may say, well, actually, I want to step up the authentication level and I want 2 factors. So I want to then invoke Azure MFA. Now, what we can actually do with Citrix Analytics now is we can actually connect Citrix Analytics to the Microsoft Security Graph. So this then means that events which are generated from the Microsoft Security Graph based on the Azure Identity Protection and Windows Advanced Threat Protection today, we're able to actually feed into Citrix Analytics to further inform those security models. So anything unusual that we see in terms of kind of how the user's identity is being secured, or any feedback that we receive from Windows Advanced Threat Protection, we can then use to respond and potentially control how the user interacts with the environment. Further integration is going to be coming soon, so there's going to be further capabilities around pulling in data from Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, Azure Information Protection, Azure Security Center. So the more data points that we feed into this solution, the more actionable the recommendations become. So this is a fantastic enhancement, and it reduces, again, simplifies the administrative experience because it's then reducing the number of portals that you actually have to go to be able to leverage these types of insights. So rather than having to have one eye on Citrix Analytics and one eye on Microsoft Security Graph, you can then just feed the Microsoft Security Graph into Citrix Analytics and leverage that as your single touch point into the environment. So Citrix SD-WAN has been a real strength for Citrix in the last couple of years. Leveraging their partnership with Microsoft, there are some nice capabilities that Citrix SD-WAN delivers. One of the key messages they've been emphasizing for the last few months is that Microsoft have actually released some network connectivity principles. So these are sort of best practice guidelines in terms of how you should aim to manage your networking to make sure that you're getting an optimal Office 365 experience. So some of the key things we've got here is to be able to identify and differentiate Office 365 traffic. So again, Office 365 is different from your traditional network traffic. So we need to be able to handle it differently. And the first step of that is to be able to actually identify what's Office 365 traffic and what's not. The other recommendation is to be able to egress network connections locally. So being able to break out from the branch. So again, this is an area where a lot of enterprises face challenges because traditionally they may be routing internet traffic through a security appliance in the data center, which then feeds into our next point, which is avoiding network hairpins. So this is, as I mentioned before, a situation where you have a kind of hub and spoke network where you may have branches where traffic routes back through the data center before it can go out to the internet for security reasons. Obviously, that then increases the latency on the connections, which is not ideal for Office 365 traffic. And they recommend that the traffic bypasses proxies, traffic inspection devices, and duplicate security technologies. So again, it's basically making sure that the Office 365 traffic has the most simple route to the Office 365 service. So how does Citrix SD-WAN help with that? Well, so some of the kind of key capabilities in terms of being able to egress network connections locally, avoiding network hairpins. These are kind of some of the fundamental capabilities of the Citrix SD-WAN solution. And again, bypassing proxies and traffic inspection devices is again something which is a built-in capability. One of the new capabilities in the 10.2 release of Citrix SD-WAN is the ability to identify and differentiate Office 365 traffic. So this has previously been possible, but effectively what you're then down to is either having to try and do deep packet inspection on the connections as they come through to understand what's Office 365 and what's not. Or you're then in a situation where potentially you have to then maintain a white list of IP addresses, which are used by Office 365 to be able to try and do first packet routing to the Office 365 service. Now, what Citrix SD-WAN have the ability to do now is the ability to use Microsoft APIs to be able to instantly identify and categorize different types of Office 365 traffic. Now, this is great because it then means that you've got a closed loop system, so it doesn't need information being fed in by you on a kind of like weekly or monthly basis to make sure it's all up to date. And it can just intelligently route the traffic, so it can understand what traffic is latency sensitive, so what needs to be broken out from the branch and sent to the nearest Microsoft POP. And it understands what isn't going to be latency sensitive, so it can make intelligent routing decisions based on that. So the benefit of that is that we can break out latency sensitive traffic, and by virtue of the Azure WAN and POPs around the world, typically if you break out connections from the branch, then your branch is going to be within around 30 milliseconds of an Office 365 POP. So you can see some real immediate returns. So Citrix have done some internal testing, and there are significant improvements which will be noticed by users. So I think the key takeaway there is that users will notice an improvement in performance if you follow these network connectivity principles supported by Citrix SD-WAN. So just to give you an idea in terms of, so we've talked about admin simplification. So just to show you what that actually looks like in the real world is there's a tick box, which is fantastic. So we can just define our Office 365 traffic. We want to allow a direct internet breakout from the branch. So nice, simple configuration, but delivering a better user experience. So then we've got HDX Adaptive Throughput. So HDX Adaptive Throughput was something which has been kind of incrementally worked on over the last 6 months. So one of the things that we're finding with HDX at the moment is there's some significant improvements being made. So kind of last year, the big announcements was around EDT, enlightened data transport and adaptive transport. So the ability to use UDP and TCP connections, or preferably UDP, for the actual transport layer for Citrix connections. Now, that delivered some kind of fantastic results from a lot of customers where we've actually used that. So in terms of seeing better user experience, more responsive workspaces, EDT kind of had some fantastic returns. Obviously, the work doesn't stop there. So kind of one of the things they've been working on in the background is adaptive throughput. So this fundamentally what this is within the HDX stack or within ICA, there's some buffers which are configured. Now, historically, these have always been statically configured on the client. Now, for those of you who kind of manage Citrix environments, you'll appreciate as soon as settings are on the client, they become quite difficult to maintain and update. So there's some kind of challenges around that. Now, in the 1808 release, what Citrix did was they gave administrators the ability to statically update these. So if you had a particular network condition that you needed to configure different buffer settings for, then you could then do that on the client side, which again was a nice capability if you had the ability to deploy those settings. But again, it was quite a challenge to actually administer. Now, in the 1811 release, which was released in November, there's a new feature which is called HDX Adaptive Throughput. Now, adaptive is the important bit here. So what they've done is they've actually changed the buffers which are used for the HDX connections to be controlled by the VDA, so the Virtual Delivery Agent. What that gives us the ability to do is to then dynamically control those buffers that are being used by the client and the VDA based on the network conditions. So dependent on whether you've got kind of a high bandwidth, low latency connection, or if you've got a low bandwidth, high latency connection, or anything in between, it can then adaptively change those buffers. Now, what that gives you is effectively, if you've got a high bandwidth environment, it can mean that you can have more throughput for your HDX connection. So what's that going to mean in real terms? That's going to mean better visual performance, more responsiveness, better print jobs, faster print jobs, faster client file throughput. So anything which is going to benefit from more bandwidth in the HDX connection is going to benefit from this feature. So we can see here just some kind of rough numbers. So from the 1808 release to the 1811 release, we're seeing about 160% increase in the maximum throughput. From the last long-term service release, so 7.15 to the 1811 release, we're seeing about 400% improvement in maximum throughput for the HDX sessions. So they're fairly significant numbers, especially if you're working kind of a more graphical environment, or if users are working with kind of videos or rich media, or even if they're not, if they're just working with kind of traditional applications, then what you should see is that the Citrix connections in your environment are using or have the ability to use more bandwidth where it's going to be appropriate for that. There are going to be some kind of new, there's going to be further work being done on the HDX stack, which again, I'd expect to see some announcements kind of more towards synergy timeframe, but this is still very much an active area for Citrix to work on. So they're not sitting on their laurels and accepting what they've got as being the best they can do. They are actively working on making sure that the user experience continues to improve and continues to be able to adapt to different customer environments. So Intelligent Workspace is an interesting one. So Intelligent Workspace is something that Citrix are looking at this year. So some of you may remember from last year, one of the big announcements was the Citrix Workspace service. So Citrix Workspace is, I shouldn't really call it, but it's effectively storefront in the cloud, but with much more. So Workspace consolidates all the Citrix offerings, the different Citrix solutions. It consolidates your virtual apps and desktops. It gives users a single place to access their files in the Citrix Content Collaboration Service. It can give them a single workspace where they can access mobile and SaaS applications through the cloud access control. So effectively, it's the one place that you go to access anything from your Citrix workspace. So what the aspiration is from Citrix is the challenge at the moment is that Workspace is, to simplify it very much, it's effectively a launcher. So it's somewhere that you go to start other things. So it may be somewhere that you go to open a new SaaS application. It may be somewhere that you go to launch a virtual apps and desktop session. So kind of launching a published application or a Windows 10 desktop kind of on-prem or in the cloud. But effectively, it's just a launcher at the moment. What they're looking at doing, and the aspiration is to make Workspace more of a place that users go to get things done. And one of the key things they're working on is ways that they can improve employee engagement. So one of the common challenges that we see is that a lot of organizations kind of start adopting things like SaaS applications because they're nice ways of interacting with data. They're nice ways of owning less infrastructure and kind of consuming things as a service. The downside of that is that the more that you consume, the more portals, the more touch points users have to go through to get things done. So if you've got 6 or 7 SaaS applications and a user has to go through 6 or 7 different SaaS applications, even with single sign-on configured, it can be quite an abrasive experience if they're having to kind of move between multiple applications to do kind of their general day-to-day tasks. So what Citrix are looking at is ways to enhance that experience. So in terms of making the Workspace more intelligent, what they're looking at doing is ways that they can surface effectively information from other applications. So these applications could well be SaaS applications. So it could be kind of like your Salesforce, your Concur. It could be Workday. It could be a number of Office 365, Power BI, things like that. Or it could be applications which you host on premises. So it could be kind of a SQL-based application. It could be one of any number of database-driven applications which you might host on premises. So kind of Oracle-based and the likes. So what the intelligent workspace will look like is much more that people will go to Workspace and they will be able to, from a single pane of glass, be able to see key information from these many applications which are out there. So that then organizes that information into a single place where users can access it. So that's step one. In terms of delivering an intelligent workspace, is some consolidation, being able to draw in data feeds and action points from multiple different locations. Now, step 2 in that journey is to be able to guide users. So that's when we start to look at things like relevance. So what's relevant to you as a user? So being able to apply some machine learning concepts to be able to understand what information is going to be more relevant for the user who's accessing it. So rather than just showing them a flurry of every data point that they might need access to, being able to highlight the ones which are going to be more interesting for them or more relevant for them, and being able to guide them towards those. So it's all about making the data more actionable. So rather than having to have users go through multiple systems to be able to find things, you can then effectively highlight the things which they're going to need and be able to allow them to drive those actions from that interface. So rather than just pulling out data and saying, for example, there's an expenses claim that needs approving, you would have the ability to drill into that, view the details of that expenses claim within that same pane, and then from there be able to kind of approve or deny that. So without leaving that central workspace. So the step on from that is to be able to add more automation. So this is where things become kind of actually intelligent, in that if you have autonomous responses that you can start to integrate into the solution, so you can then train the system that will actually, the last 5 times that the user's been prompted with this, they've been able to kind of just approve this because it's under a certain limit, for example, then you may want to be able to empower the solution to be able to automatically respond to that. Or If it's not autonomous, then you could potentially just build additional workflows into it, potentially linking together multiple systems, which may otherwise require users to go to multiple touch points to control. So what this is effectively doing is, it's about improving employee engagement. So simplifying the number of systems they need to be able to access to drive basic processes. So being able to control some of the sprawl that we see in a lot of enterprises. Now, just to give you an idea that this isn't a fantastical idea that Citrix has just dreamed up, some of you may have noticed that Citrix did actually make an acquisition of a company called Sappho in November last year. Now, Sappho have been around for several years, and one of the key things that they do is to be able to do a lot of what we've just talked about. So they have the ability to create micro apps which can be delivered through a web portal, and they can integrate with a number of different SaaS providers and a number of different on-premises solutions. Now, this might sound like it's going to be quite difficult to actually implement. So this is all nice, but as soon as we start talking integration with multiple different products, that's where, kind of in my experience, things can start to get quite challenging. So the reason why Sappho makes things quite interesting is because they have been around for a number of years in the space, and they're one of the only companies which are actually kind of doing things like this. But because of their track record and because of their existence for a number of years and kind of working with a number of customers, they do have built-in integrations with a significant number of common providers. So the idea is that it should be relatively low friction to start to integrate the systems that you're using into a solution like this. So I've mentioned on the slide, expect to see more at Synergy. It's definitely something which there are going to be some announcements about over the coming months. So it's certainly an area to kind of pay attention to. Intelligent Workspace generally is going to be a big thing this year because purely because of the returns on investment that can be delivered, there's a lot of opportunity there. To be able to enhance how people are working, because fundamentally the way that people work hasn't changed in years. We're still delivering kind of the same applications. The way we're delivering those applications may change, but adding some intelligence in terms of how users actually interact with those applications is an area where we see a lot of interest from a lot of customers, and especially from users being able to simplify workflows and working styles. It's quite a popular area at the moment, so it's going to be interesting seeing some of the new capabilities being released around this. So that's what we have for our Citrix Summit highlights. So, like I say, there is a lot going on in the workspace space at the moment. Citrix is certainly working hard at delivering some new capabilities. Like I say, there's unfortunately only so much that we can actually talk about publicly at the moment, but hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour as to some of the things that are available now and in the works, and obviously we look forward to being able to talk more with you as we are able to. So hopefully what we'll try and do is do some more deep dive webinars as soon as some of these capabilities are more formally released, to give you a more in-depth understanding of how they work and how you can gain some value from them. So with that, I'll thank you all for joining. Hopefully that's been useful. And yeah, if anyone has any questions or anything they'd like to discuss further, if you just get in contact with your account manager, we'll be able to set up a conversation and can hopefully help you out. So with that, I'll say thank you again, and look forward to speaking to you all soon, hopefully.